Hello, and thanks for joining me today. My name's Jeff, and you're listening to episode 1 of the Comic Book of the Day podcast. So today we're going to dive right in, right? So this is the Comic Book of the Day podcast, and I figured it would be fun to talk about a different comic every day. I could just randomly go through my comic book collection and we could pick comics and we could talk about them and discuss them. Perhaps discuss the context of when they were published, some of the background, maybe a little bit of pop culture history around the same time. But anyway, that's the plan, right? So we're going to talk today about The Flash number 273. Most of these, if all of them, I would say, pretty much 99.9% of these books are going to be chosen at random. I don't really have a stake in having one comic or the other, or to talk about one comic over the other. So I figured I would just go through and pick a whole bunch of comics and sort of randomize them as best I could, picking here and there and here and there. So they'll be changed up. There'll be a fair representation of my overall comic book collection and taste and stuff. I think after a while you might sort of get to know what kind of comic book reader I am and who I prefer to sort of read based on the averages of the books that you should get. But today is not that case. Today is, since it's the first episode of the Comic Book of the Day podcast, I thought that it would be fun to grab the comic book that is probably the least special in my comic book collection, but perhaps the most special at the same time. By that I mean, it's not really a key issue, right? Nothing super happens. It leads up to some pretty significant things in the Flash story at the time. Again, this is summer of 1979. This is a published date of May 1979. So more than likely, it probably hit the stands around March of 1979. DC, for whatever reason, would the newsstand date, the date that it would appear on the newsstand, was usually a couple months prior to what was printed on the cover. So this has a cover date of May 1979, but more than likely it was probably in your supermarket or drugstore around March of 1979. So that puts it squarely in my 12th birthday range. So I'm guessing that this book has a particularly close tie to my 12th birthday. I don't know the specifics. For instance, I don't know if this was actually birthday money, but I just think the correlation is something that I wouldn't dismiss. Knowing that this thing was probably on the newsstands in March, and I was turning 12 around March. And then this was my 12th birthday. So I think I had owned comic books prior to this. I had purchased special comic books or comic books that caught my eye, or relatives had bought me comic books prior. So I had been exposed to the medium, and I was an avid reader of them up until I was 12 years old. But I think this one sticks out in my mind because I believe that this might be the first sort of adult purchase that I made. This was somebody probably giving me some money, but I do remember sort of walking up and getting this at drug fair in Chesterfield County. So it would have been a drugstore. And in the back of drug fair, they had a comic rack that you could go to that would have all of the comics for that particular month. It was Marvel, DC, Harvey. And I used to ride my bike from my house to the drug fair. And I think this might have been one of the first instances where a relative didn't buy me a comic, or a comic just wasn't something to occupy my time. I made, I believe, a conscious decision to collect this comic. I think I sort of weighed my options on the spinner rack. I'm positive it was a spinner rack. You would have had to sort of spin around slowly, right? Taking in all of the comics that are there. You would, typically I wasn't a Harvey Comics reader, so I wouldn't read Richie Rich or any of those. But I would gravitate towards superheroes. And then I believe the cover, the Dick Giordano and Ross Andru cover of Flash, speeding through a prison and knocking out all of the inmates. And the security guard on the cover is amazed and saying, the Flash is stopping the prison riot single-handed. I think the illustration of speed and the way that Flash is drawn on the cover, it's a Ross Andru, Dick Giordano teamed up a lot during this time period. But it's a beautiful cover. It's a beautiful rendition of Flash. The story inside is pretty good. It's called Harvest of Hate. It's an interesting story that kind of starts to weave together a bunch of different plot lines. There's the initial plot line of a girl out there who's able to somehow mind control the Flash. That sort of gets dovetailed into a storyline about his wife. Barry and Iris are having some issues, and I think Iris is longing for a family. So there's that storyline. So Iris goes out and gets a new hairdo and gets herself, a new do and a new look and everything for Barry, trying to spark his interest. Apparently they're having some troubles. And then there's the backdrop of this prisoner, Dr. Nephron. This man is doing experiments on prisoners, and it's not going very well. In fact, there's sort of a cliffhanger at the very end of this issue that leads to all sorts of mayhem in the Flash universe. So I remember when I was younger, I was very taken by this book. I thought, holy mackerel, this is what I want to keep reading for, as long as I'm able to keep reading it. I think it was shortly after this I started collecting Batman comics as well. Brave and Bold was a big one that I used to buy. But this Flash number 273 in May of 1979, this one was the one that sort of kicked off the entire thing for me. So this was May 1979. I thought we would sort of place a little context there, right? We could talk about what the context of this, I was 12 years old, so on the Billboard Hot 100 for May of 1979, if you were listening to the radio around the spring of 1979, the number one song was Peaches and Herb, Reunited. Number two was Heart of Glass, Blondie. That was another big one for me. I think I had the LP that had Deborah Harry leaning over, I think holding a flash of light or whatever, with the band standing behind her. Music Box Dancer by Frank Mills. Knock on Wood by Amy Stewart. Stumbling In by Susie Quattro and Chris Norman. The Village People with In the Navy. That's kind of prescient. Chic, I Want Your Love is number 7. Number 8 is Good Night Tonight by Paul McCartney and Wings, or in this case, just Wings. Number 9 is Take Me Home by Cher. And number 10 is Sister Sledge, He's the Greatest Dancer. So that was the Billboard Hot 100 for May of 1979. There are only a couple songs on there that I think I probably would recognize right off the bat. On television, this is really cool, right? So in May, around 1979, if you were watching TV in 79, the number one show was 60 Minutes. Remember, this is sort of probably a little bit pre-cable. Well, probably not so much pre-cable, but early cable. 60 Minutes is number 1. Three's Company is the number 2 show on television on ABC. That's Incredible is number 3. I don't know how many of you remember That's Incredible, but I believe that would have been early reality TV. Alice, MASH, Dallas, Flo, which I believe was a spinoff of Alice, The Jeffersons, The Dukes of Hazzard, and One Day at a Time. Right, so those are your top 10 shows around May of 1979. If you were at the movies, you probably wouldn't have too much to choose from. I think around this time you had Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, The Dawn of the Dead. I probably wouldn't have seen that at 12 years old. Manhattan, Woody Allen. I definitely wouldn't have seen that at 12 years old. Hot Stuff, Winter Kills, Alien. Alien would have been out around May 25th, 1979. That probably would have been the biggest movie of the day. I seem to recall seeing Alien at some point when I was a kid, but I don't remember exactly how. If I had to guess, I would say probably HBO. That seems to be the rule of thumb. But anyway, that's the comic book of the day today. That's Flash 273, May 1979, DC Comics. Check it out on the website, comicbookoftheday.com. Follow us on Twitter at CBoftheday on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram at Comic Book of the Day, and we are on Facebook at facebook.com/Comic Book of the Day. Those should all be ways that you can track and follow and keep up with all the fun stuff that we're doing. I will see you tomorrow. And well, I wonder if I should maybe spoil a little bit about the next day's comic book. Well, maybe we'll see how that works out. Tomorrow, I tell you what, I'll do this. I'll say tomorrow is a Superman book. There you go. How's that? Comic Book of the Day. I'm Jeff. We'll see you tomorrow.